Why is storytelling important in your job? You're a program director, market manager, sales manager, vice president. Why is storytelling crucial for you being good at your job? Anybody shout it out. Why would you need to be a good storyteller to do your job well? Relatable. How you connect. We talked about connecting. It paints a picture. We are trying to teach on-air presenters storytelling. So if you know storytelling, then you're better able to teach it. We're going to talk about storytelling, and I need 5 brave volunteers, who will come up here on stage, and we're going to play a game. Okay, give me this microphone. Tell everybody your name.
Matthew, but everybody calls me 12. That's what's on my name.
It's 12?
Yep.
Okay, and your name?
Gabe.
Gabe. Excellent. And your name?
Jen.
Jen. And let's see, we need a couple more.
Come on.
Jake.
Jake.
It's not volunteering.
One more volunteer. We call that voluntolding.
Yes.
One more, come on up. And this is Brent.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Brent.
Thank you.
Let's have a big hand for our brave volunteers. This game is called That Reminds Me of the Time. So here's how it works. I'm going to hand you the microphone, and you're going to start telling a story.
Oh boy.
A story about anything. It could be the story about something that happened last night, a story about something that happened 20 years ago, the story of your first kiss, the story of your first job in radio, a story about how you walked your dog. It could be a story about anything. Now you're going to start telling your story, and you just keep telling the story, and you are going to be listening very, very carefully, because the moment that her story reminds you of a different story, of your story, that has something to do with her story, you're going to reach over, gently grab the microphone and say, "That reminds me of the time," and you're going to start telling your story. And you're going to tell your story, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's true and it relates to the first story. And you're going to be listening very carefully.
Okay.
And as soon as his story reminds you of a story that happened to you, gently reach over, grab the microphone and say, "That reminds me of the time." Everybody have the idea?
Got it.
You got a story?
Oh yeah.
Okay, let's give this a try. 1, 2, 3, go.
So there was a spider the size of my palm in my bedroom the other night, and I contemplated how to kill it for 3 hours, and then I ended up not killing it, and it's somewhere in my house still. Haven't found it. I actually did it on Instagram Live, so all of our listeners can watch it. That was a fun saga. But honestly, it was the size of my palm.
That reminds me of the last time that I actually got pulled over by the police because, now hear me out. I didn't know a wasp was in my car. And you know the buzz from a wasp is different from a bee or from a fly, and you don't know where it's coming from, so you swerve when you hear it there. And it hit me on the back of the head, and I went, "Ah!" And I went real hard, right? And I tried to explain to the officer what happened, and he really didn't believe me, so I had to go ahead and eat that, but that's what my story relates to your story.
That reminds me of a time that I was coming home from an event. This was way back in my early promo days, and it was one of the last events that I worked for the station before I had gotten my first full-time gig. I was coming home late night, and I was speeding across a bridge that is a notorious speed trap, and I always told myself, start slowing down because there's always police on the other end. And so as I get to the end, officer pulls me over, and he's asked, "Oh, where are you coming from?" It's 1:32 in the morning. "Oh, I work for the radio station, and I had something that I was doing." And to prove it, I tried to pull one of the swag skateboard decks that we had that I happened to have in my car and show him. And at that point, he goes, "Okay, well, you're still speeding, so I'm just going to knock it down to like 6 miles an hour, 7, whatever they give you, so they can still give you a ticket without making you have to pay more fines." So that's really...
Which reminds me of a story where we were in college and we were drunk. And when I say we, I mean not me. That sounds like a joke, but really, like, I'm a real big rule follower, and so I wasn't drunk. I'm the designated, I was 20, I wasn't 21 yet, so I hadn't started drinking yet. But I was with all my friends who were drunk and were also underage, and we were walking home. Cop pulls up to us, and it's my turn. I have to find some common ground with this cop so we can have a dialogue and we can become friends quickly before he realizes that all my friends who are over here holding barely together, so I can figure out how to distract the cop from these guys they're drunk and we got to get off the hook here. So he starts talking to me and he asks me, pulls out my ID, "Oh, you're from the Dalles. Do you like elk hunting?" Fact is, I don't know anything about elk hunting, but for that moment, I had to pretend very quickly, oh yeah, no, I know everything about elk hunting, and I just start making it up as we're going.
That reminds me of a time I had elk for dinner, and it was the most gamey thing I had ever tasted in my life. But we were in Denver, so I felt like I had to, live like a mountain man, and so I tried it. And then they told me it wasn't cooked. I forget what you call it when the meat... Tartar.
Tartar.
It was elk tartar. So that really reminds me of the time that I first had elk.
Let's have a big hand for our storytellers. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jade. When you tell stories, it engages the brain in a much deeper, more emotional level. You can take any giant idea and put it in a story, and people will repeat that story. The issue was evil in the world, and the Bible gave that to us in the story of Noah and the ark. So we can talk about ratings and Nielsen and numbers, but let me tell you the story about Dex and Barbie T in Greenville, South Carolina with Mike Klein, and how they are now giving Hawk and Tom fits in Morning Drive on a much smaller signal because they're so authentic and so fun and such great storytellers. Using stories is much more illuminating than using information or facts. We're all going to tell a story, each and every one of us, here in the next 55 minutes. Each of you are going to tell a story about a personal, proud moment. This is a moment in your life when you rang the bell. This is when you scored a victory, when you got the job, when you got that date that you were looking for, the birth of your child, the ratings victory, where you overcame an obstacle, where you faced one of your fears. You're going to tell the story of a personal, proud moment. You're going to have 60 seconds. Why is it important for you to tell a story in 60 seconds?
Gets to the point.
Gets to the point?
Keeps your attention.
Keeps your attention.
That's all you got.
Bingo. When you're standing here one day as a programming executive at Alpha Media, you've got a room full of people who are highly distracted. And the minute that you lose their attention, mentally, they're out the door. Telling stories keeps people engaged. We're going to walk through step by step how to throw together a really good story in no time at all and how to tell it well. Would you like to see an example of a personal proud moment?
Yes.
So this is the story I always tell people, just as an example. Let me get this out of the way. I got my dog on Tinder. I'm a divorced guy, I'm doing the dating apps, and I meet this German woman, Silke. She's really athletic, short black hair, it's got a big tattoo all the way across her shoulders. Serious athlete, very funny, hilarious woman. And we're dog lovers. I'm a dog lover, she's a dog lover. And I said, I had an Irish setter mix, a mutt, who died, and I think I'm ready to get another dog. And she said, well, there's an Irish setter club here in Portland. Sometimes they have rescue dogs. And I said, I don't know. And I am a very anxious, worrying, hypochondriac kind of person. And purebred dogs, they're crazy. They have a lot of mental issues. I'm not doing a purebred dog. And in her German logic, Silke says, well, sometimes they have homeless dogs that need a place. So I said, okay. So I go down there, farm in Washington State, and there's Mickey. Beautiful red Irish setter with that long flowing fur, always wagging his tail, always wants to play. I walk him around here in downtown Portland every day. What a beautiful dog, what a beautiful dog, what a beautiful dog. It's like walking around with Brad Pitt. It's the best decision I ever made in my life. And I can tell you that I am living proof that you can find love on Tinder. It's not a very good story, but I told it in a very intentional way. And what I want you to do is take the notebooks that we passed out. Hopefully everybody has one. And you're going to want to scribble down some notes so you're going to be ready to tell your story here very shortly. Now, if I'm going to write down the subject of my story, what's the subject of my story?
You find your dog on Tinder.
How I got my dog on Tinder, but it's more about how I adopted a homeless dog. Yeah. Here's how I got my dog. What you want to do is think of a story that you want to tell, and in just one sentence, summarize it. So you get it down on paper. What's the story that you want to tell in just a few minutes? I'll give you just a moment to write down that sentence, the story that you want to tell here in this room here in just a little bit. What's the story you're going to talk about? So once you've got that headline down, these are going to be good. There's a template that you can follow. It's kind of a fill-in-the-blank storytelling model. Where's the best place for you to start your story? Is it at the beginning, at the middle, or at the end?
Middle.
At the beginning? At the end? Where did I start my story? Anybody remember how the first words, what were the first things I said in my story? Yeah, where is that story beginning? At slightly toward the end, right? Yep. You ever see those movies where they have the big car chase and the explosions and people are getting shot, and then they go back and show you everything that led up to that? Yep. That's the idea. So our term for that is start with a scene. Start with a scene. Just like we teach on-air personalities, the number one place where on-air people lose their audience is in that transition between the song and content. Because most of them turn on the mic, and what do? Call letters, slogan, name of the show, time, temperature. Hey everybody, happy hump day. So glad that you joined us. The equivalent of that is you in a meeting getting ready to tell a story, and you go right here. Hey everybody, thank you so much for being here. We've got such a great presentation. I can't wait to get started. No. How you start really matters. Think about where in the story you can highlight in the first sentence. How can you tell people what your story is all about and get their attention? Because people judge you when you're in front of an audience on how quickly you can get to the point and get them interested. So everybody write down what's the first words out of your mouth when you start to tell that story. Just like I said, I got my dog on Tinder. I'll give you a minute to scribble down a note. Let's talk about conflict. You ever have conflict at your radio station? Between sales and programming, between programming and on-air personalities, between record labels and they want you to add it, you don't. Conflict is a bad thing, right? In storytelling, conflict is a really good thing. The better the conflict, the better the story. Does anybody remember what the conflict was in my story? Yeah, I want a dog, but I'm a big worrywart, so I don't want a purebred dog. So I have an inner conflict. I really love dogs, but I'm kind of torn because I don't want a lot of veterinarian bills. In your story, there's a conflict. Just as Indiana Jones, you've seen those movies with Harrison Ford? If he's going to go out and find the Holy Grail, and he just goes, oh, it's right here by Starbucks. I found that thing, thank goodness. Movie's over. Instead, he's got to go face people with big swords and run through tunnels with spikes coming through and big boulders that are trying to smush him and plane crashes. And you've got all these obstacles. So there are things in your story where you are trying to get to a goal and there were things holding you back. There may be people holding you back. Where's the conflict? You don't want to skimp on telling what the conflict is in your story. Take just a moment, I'll be quiet, and just put one sentence down. What's really at stake in your story? I would imagine in a story where you're dealing with the awesome force of nature, there's a lot of conflict in that story for sure. The next thing you want to think about are characters. Not a very good story if you don't have characters. And the more interesting the characters are, the better the story. Who were the characters in the funny story that I told? What was their name? Zilka. Funny German name, and yet somebody remembered it because it's in a story. And what was Zilka like? How would you describe her?
Athletic. Tattooed.
Tattooed?
Funny.
So there's a physical and there's an emotional. She's athletic and tattooed, and she's funny. And she swiped on me. Nice. What about other characters in the story?
Brad Pitt dog.
The Brad Pitt dog.
Strangers.
Physical and emotional. Always wagging his tail, always wants to play, and he's physically a gorgeous dog. Trisha just saw him outside a little while ago. And what did you say? What a beautiful dog. So think about your character. And by the way, was I a character in my story too? Right. I shared a little bit about my flaws and my fears, and that lends to your authenticity. Just like we tell on-air personalities, show your real self. Show the kinks in your armor. Like we were talking about, the real diamonds have flaws. You have flaws. You have weaknesses, your anxieties, and the more you reveal those to your on-air audience and to the audience in your jock meeting, you're a character in your story too. Here's a little exercise. I want you to think of a person in your family. It could be any family member, it doesn't matter, just for practice. And I want you to describe them in two ways. One is physical. Are they tall? Are they short? Do they always wear a purple hat? What is it about them physically where you could describe them? And what is it about them emotionally? Are they always grumpy? Are they always laughing? Are they very kind to strangers? Just a half sentence about each. And I want you to turn to the person next to you and describe that person, half sentence for physical, half sentence for emotional. Think of a person in your family and describe them physically, just very, very briefly, and emotionally, very, very briefly. Do that now. Who would like to share something their partner told them, a person that your partner told you that you thought was really interesting and memorable? Yes, you have one. What was your partner's name and what was their family member?
Mike Klein talking about his mom.
His mom? And how did he describe his mom?
Oh, I can't do that to Mike.
My mom wants me to get married already. She says I married radio and she wants me to marry a real live person. But she says I don't have to marry a Jewish girl anymore. That's the good news.
Okay.
I'm Jewish and finally they're accepting I can marry anybody. So I'm excited about that. Yeah, we just gotta find someone to marry though.
We're going to get you married here in Portland while you're here.
I want to see, yeah.
Oh, we go to 97% of the population.
We'll see.
So that's her behavior, that's her emotion. What is she like physically? How could you describe her in a half sentence?
She's always walking. You can never get her to stop walking. She just walks. She loves walking around cities. You know,
Very energetic.
very energetic. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. Who else wants to share something their partner shared about a family member that was memorable? Greg, shout it out so everybody can hear.
She told me her dad has a big belly and a big belly laugh, and so right when she said, I said, "Oh, I want to meet him."
Could you all hear that? He has a big belly and a big belly laugh. In your story, you want to have characters. You don't want to spend a lot of time describing them because you only have 60 seconds, but something about them physically and something about them emotionally. It could be about you, your boss, whoever else is in the story that you're telling, but that's how you want to describe them to make it more memorable. Earlier today, well, we were talking about radio. When we're on the radio, we are talking in two dimensions. One is our content, and that's our words, and the other is our voice. So we spend a lot of time thinking about our words and what we're going to say, and then we use our voice to convey emotion, to make the story better, to pause and serve as a pattern disruption, loud and soft. We might whisper, we might shout, we might do character voices. That makes us a two-dimensional speaker because on radio, that's all you can do. But there are two more dimensions to being a good storyteller. Anybody want to guess what they are? If you're in a real-life setting like this?
Body language.
Body language. Body language. Everybody stand up. I want you to say this phrase with me exactly as I say it. I really need you to think. Did you notice everybody is standing here like wooden poles? They're not moving at all. Listen up a little bit. Move your arms around a little bit. Let's try that again. I really need you to think.
I really need you to think.
Yes, this is body noise. This may be jujitsu, but we call that body noise. It's not in harmony with your content. This is just you waving your arms around. But when you can make your gestures move in harmony with what you're trying to say, then you become a much better communicator. Anybody have a guess of what percentage of your total communication when you're in a room like this is coming through your words? 7%. 7%. What about your tone and your voice? What percentage?
30%.
38. The rest of it, 55%, is body language. And that comes through in your emotions and your gestures. And you want to think about, how can I say that using my movement? If you want to say the word I using just your hands, how do you say that? I. If you want to say you using just your hands, what do? You. Yeah, now in some neighborhoods in Portland, you don't want to do this necessarily because that could be a problem. But around the world, you can gesture with an open palm, and that's pretty well accepted. So I, you. What if you want to say think using just your hands? think. Let's put it all together. I really need you to think. Now, am I suggesting that you need to be a mime when you're holding a meeting or you're giving a presentation? No. But just remember to let your natural emotion and the meaning of what you're trying to say come through in your body language. That's 3 dimensions of being a good public speaker. Anybody want to take a guess what the 4th dimension is? Let's think about the space. You have a space in your meeting room or your conference room. You have a space in your office. You have a space when you're in a theater like this. How could you use this space as a communication tool? Let's think about that as you're telling your story. Imagine for a minute that I ask you to say, tell us the story of all the places that you've lived in your life up until now. What cities you've moved to. And let's imagine that I'm standing on a map of the United States, just for pretend. And I'm standing here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm looking south, okay? Where from here is Seattle? This way. Where is Texas? Where is Japan? New York City? Right. You got the general idea. So if I were going to tell my life story, just as an example, I might do it something like this. I was born in Los Angeles and then went to Phoenix, Arizona in the 1st grade. When I was 7 years old, what could be better than living on the beach in San Juan, Puerto Rico? Then later on, my family's all from the Carolinas. I lived in South Carolina and North Carolina. We lived up in Maine for a while. As an adult, I moved down to Atlanta, and I even lived in St. Louis for a little while. And now, my favorite place I've ever lived, I live 2 blocks away in a condo near Alpha Media headquarters in Portland, Oregon. So think now, space, the final frontier. Think about how could you use your body language, your facial expressions. How can you move around as you're telling your story? If you're running, if you're talking a story about running from the police, how could you run? Did anybody notice the body language? You can all sit down now, thank you. What body language was I using when I was, what's that? Yeah, anybody see me walking the dog with the leash? This is not about you getting the spotlight on you because you're trying to be important. This is about keeping the focus on you and getting the spotlight so you can turn the spotlight onto a problem or onto a project or onto an individual that needs help, onto something new at your station. You have to command the spotlight so that you can turn the spotlight onto certain things in your work. So the thing you want to think about, space. Being a good storyteller can help you be more efficient as a communicator when you're doing your job. Take a moment and write down, how can I use my body language? How can I use my gestures? How can I move around a little bit to help make this a better story? Last thing you want to think about, we want to pay a lot of attention to the first sentence that you say, but then what about the ending? What do they do in gymnastics at the Olympics when they do those amazing flips and tumbles, and then they come up at the end and they stick the landing? How do you stick the landing? On air, we always ask on-air personalities to know what your exit is. How are you going to wrap up a segment? But when you are speaking, telling a story in a situation like this, what's the last thing you're going to say to tie a bow in your story? Anybody remember what the last sentence of my story was? You really can find love on Tinder. So in a way, I've kind of got the first and the last, it's kind of a box. And then everything else just kind of tumbles around in between. If you can get that first sentence and the last sentence together, the rest of it will come together very quickly. Think about your story and what's the last sentence, the last words that you can say and those, as the 60 seconds starts to run out. I'll let you think about that just for a moment. Now it's go time. We're first going to do a dry run and then we're going to do a wet run. A dry run is we're all going to stand and I'm going to be the timekeeper. I'm going to count 60 seconds and you're going to tell your story out loud for practice. So you can wander around in the room anywhere you want, but pretend that you're telling the story up here on stage. Tell it just as you would. We're all going to be talking at the same time, so it's going to be very noisy in here, but that's okay. But we want you to stand so you can have your body language and your space movements, and everybody's going to go at one time. That's your dry run. And after we do that, we're going to have everybody partner and do a wet run. You're going to tell your story to a partner, and they're going to give you feedback after they listen, and you can tweak it a little bit, get a sense of how it's going, and we'll get it down to 60 seconds. Everybody have the idea? Time!
And you win.
Who got finished with their story? Raise your hand. Oh, good job. Better than average. 60 seconds goes by pretty quickly. Any of you need to cut anything? Feel like you might have to shrink that down just a little bit? All right, well, think about that for a moment. What can you leave on the cutting room floor, as they say, to get it in within 60 seconds? But you want to definitely leave in the conflict. You want to make sure you nail that first sentence. Start with the scene. You want to make sure you include just a little bit about character, just a half sentence on each one, and make sure you stick that landing at the end. Now, everybody, find a partner. Hopefully somebody you haven't met before. Somebody brand new. Find a partner. Take your smartphone with you, and then turn and face me. Everybody find a partner and turn and face me. Go. So the phone is for coming up. So in a moment, not now, this is your practice run. This is your wet run. So you choose who goes first, but one of you tell your story, just as you just did, but do it for real. And your audience member is going to be taking notes. Audience member, if you're listening to the story, make sure you remember everything they did well. Make sure you remind them, hey, that was really good, that was high five, I liked how you told that, and give them maybe one thing that they could do better if they want to improve on that. Then we're going to switch places and the shoe's on the other foot. If you were the speaker, now you're the audience. If you're the audience, now you're the speaker. After we do that, then you're going to play camera person for the other person, and we're going to film each other on your own phone. We'll get to that in just a second. But I'm going to time you again. You have 60 seconds to tell your story to your partner, and then we're going to swap feedback. Time! All right, you guys are getting this down.
On money.
Now we're doing it for real. Now, here's what you do. Take your smartphone, take the phone out of your pocket, and hand the phone over to your partner. Put it on video mode, and they're going to videotape you telling your story. That way the evidence stays on your phone, and you can take it with you. So you can go in any order this time, but this time they're going to videotape you telling your story for real. And we won't show this video to anybody, just Facebook. Okay, time. Thank you, guys. So let me show you, let me get you to show me. Show me with your fingers how good was the story that you just heard. If your partner, if they were like, this guy, this woman should be doing a TED Talk tomorrow, they are fantastic, a 10. One is they did a terrible job. Oh, we got a 10 right here. We got another 10 right here. Got a 10? We got a 10. We got to hear this story. Let's have a big hand. Thank you so much. What's your name?
Phil. I go by PK.
Phil? PK.
Yes.
This is PK, everybody.
PK.
So 60 seconds, your personal proud moment. The stage is yours, sir.
All right. So the first date that I took my wife on, we went and saw Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained. Exactly what you're thinking right now. So here's me, a 22-year-old. I had a couple of bad relationships, and I was in that mindset of I don't really care what people think about what I want to do and all that. I was 22. That's what everybody thinks when you're 22. So I'm going out with it's late December. I'm going out with a 22-year-old, short little brunette, 5'6", grew up Baptist. Taking her to see Django Unchained. Here's Jamie Foxx shooting people. There's blood everywhere. There's Tupac playing in the background while it's all happening. But it all worked out. We've been married for 3 years, and actually, we have the ticket stubs from that movie framed and hanging in our house.
PK, everybody. Okay, we got a 10 up here. I'll bring the mic up here to you. Tell everybody your name.
My name is Jim.
Jim?
I work here at Alpha Media in Portland.
Jim from Alpha Media in Portland, everybody. Okay, Jim, tell us the story.
All right, so it was a difficult decision, but it was one that was for the best. In October 30th, 2008, my daughter Lily was born. She had a congenital heart defect. She needed open heart surgeries right away. First one came just days after she was born. And when she came back from surgery, she had an open chest. And I had to make the decision, do I let my family, do I let my friends see her like that? And ultimately I said, okay, yeah, everyone needs to see this. So the first person I brought in was my dad. Very stoic man, you know, no problems. He never showed any emotion whatsoever. Laughed every once in a while. Short little guy, jeans, always had boots on. Walks in, we go to the end of her bed, and we stand there, and you can see everything inside of her. And I look over at him, and I put my arm around him. I said, Dad, you okay? And he goes, yeah. He's wiping a tear away from his eye. And right then and there I knew that it was okay for grown men to cry.
Awesome. Amazing. Do we have any more 10s? Another 10? You got a 10 over here? Ricky. Ricky, tell everybody who you are.
Yeah, my name's Ricky. I'm the PD for Movie 92.5 in Seattle.
Got it. Let's hear it for Ricky.
All right, so this is the story of how a Wu-Tang Clan concert almost ruined my softball championship. So, like 3 months back, I planned this big Wu-Tang Clan concert with 6 of my bros, but then I ended up finding out it spaces in my mind that it's the Friday night before I have a 5-game tournament to win my softball championship. So sure enough, I'm out drinking with my guys the night before, and I knew it was going to happen, and I show up late. It's 90 degrees the game day, and I get out on the softball field, and by game 3, of course, I get a hit, and I'm running, and whoop, there it goes. There goes my left hamstring. I'm limping around, you know, looking like a giraffe, kind of the way I'm walking all weird. And so I start stretching, and my dad runs to the store, comes back, has tape, wraps up my leg. I decide to go out there, and I'm like, you know what? I don't care. I can run around. I'm better than the other players on my team. I got to help them win. So I'm running around, limping around in the outfield. And then sure enough, by the last game, I got my 7th hit in a row without having to be able to run. I just hit the ball, and I'm just like barely jogging, and it like wins us the softball championship.
Whoa! Hey, extra hand for that body language, too, with your limping and everything. That was seriously theatrical. Nice job. Any of you know the actor Gina Davis? A League of Their Own and Thelma and Louise. Do you know she's into archery? Did you know she does the bow and arrow thing? So, of course, she's a rich actor, so she hires a coach to help her with archery. And she's on the range, and she pulls that bow back, and she misses the target. And the coach comes over and says, Gina, what were you thinking about when you shot that arrow? That I suck. And he says, we have to change that. So he coached her on that, and she said from that day forward, I always tell myself, as I'm letting that string go, I'm doing the best I can. I am trying my hardest. And did you know that she nearly made it into the Sydney Olympics? Semi-finalist. Yes, and it was that one change. She says that changed everything in her life. Now, in addition to that, she's a successful actor, and she's leading an organization that's pushing to have women in more leadership roles in Hollywood. When you look at your video later, what do most people do when they look at themselves presenting? I suck, I hate my hair or lack of it, I hate my clothes, I need to lose 20 pounds, listen to my voice, it's awful, it's awful. Your air personalities do that to themselves, by the way. Instead, do what Gina Davis does. Give yourself a little credit. Say, hey, I actually told that story very well. Listen to my voice. I use good vocal dynamics. Look at my body language. Look at my eye contact with the camera. Make yourself find the things that you're doing well, and you'll get better. If you focus on the negatives, you never will. A few years ago, I was reading Forbes magazine, and I read about this company that teaches presentation skills to executives. I work for the Randy Lane Company. We could teach presenters on air on storytelling, using emotion, authenticity, good execution, choosing what's good content versus not so good content. And in the magazine, this Own the Room company is doing the same exact thing, but they're doing it for CEOs, politicians, and executives. And I showed it to Randy, and he said, that's amazing. So I reached out to them, and they said, well, thank you. We need coaches, by the way. So I started doing side jobs with Own the Room. I've been so fortunate. Before my dad passed, I got to tell him about speaking at MIT in Boston, at NBC in Hollywood, at Amazon. I'm doing a job at Facebook next week, Delta Airlines. And all the stuff that you just learned, Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook has done the same thing. And it's one part of a 1-day, 2-day, or 3-day training that they do for public speakers. And the thing that gets overlooked is, as leaders, managers, sales managers, program directors, whatever you do, your presenting skills matter. on how effective and how successful your organization and your team is. So think about how you can use storytelling and use some of the things we talked about today next time you're in front of anybody, an audience, whether it's 5 people or 500 people. Thank you all very much. It's time for lunch.